I'm AJ Bianco from Podcast PD, a part of the Education Podcast Network, just like the show you're listening to now. Shows in the network are individually owned, and opinions expressed may not reflect others. Find other interesting education podcasts at edupodcastnetwork.com.
Hey, welcome back. Steve here, and today I'm talking with Danielle Nuhfer. She is focused on helping teachers and school administrators deal with stress, overwhelm, and burnout. She's the author of The Path of the Mindful Teacher and the founder of Teaching Well. Our focus today is TLC, and you'll learn what that's all about, what it stands for, and how it works to save you from the challenges of the day. That's right, all that coming up in the show today. Thanks for listening. And oh, by the way, before you go, there's 3 really cool ways you can help the podcast out. And one is share it with a friend, a colleague, a family member, and say, hey, you really should listen to Teaching, Learning, Leading K-12, and share the link with them. Number 2, you could go to my website and leave a review as well as subscribe. That would be so cool. There's a little box on that page where you just put your email in there, and then when I put out a newsletter, it will send it straight to you. And the third way you could help me is by clicking on the link on the front of my homepage that says Buy Me a Coffee. You click on that, the link will take you in where you can donate $1 or $2 to help me address the costs associated with podcasting. That would be so cool if you did one of those things. Thank you so much. Thanks for listening. Thanks for sharing. And enjoy the show.
For just like a day or two. So the idea is when you trace your tendencies, you start to think about where you get reactive in your school day. And then you start to trace, like, when does it happen, what time of day with certain students or colleagues or scenarios or situations. And you start to just write it down. It's best when you write it down. It makes it more meaningful. And you just trace what those things are. So for a day or a couple of days, trace those major reactive moments.
It's the Education Podcast, your favorite show, with lots of groovy guests and they share what they know. So crank it up to 10 and let your neighbors know that here's another show with Dr. Steve Milletto. Teaching, learning, leading, K-12. Teaching, learning, leading, K-12. Teaching, learning, leading, K-12. With Dr. Steve Milletto.
Danielle Nuhfer is a former public school teacher turned teacher wellness coach. She's author of The Path of the Mindful Teacher and the founder of Teaching Well. With over 20 years of experience navigating the challenges of the current school system, including 2 bouts of her own burnout, she's dedicated her career to helping educators embrace and implement research-backed solutions to the pervasive stress and overwhelm running rampant in our education system so that they can be part of creating a thriving learning community. So much to talk about and catch up. Danielle, welcome back. Thanks so much for being on the show again, and say hi to everyone.
All right. Thanks so much for having me.
Well, glad to have you back on. And it's funny because, the last time we talked was episode 499, which was posted on August 21st of 2022. As we're talking today, it is January of 24. So a couple of years have passed in between there. So welcome back. And as a note, I'm now on episode 635. So there's some space in there as well with the podcast. So moving right along. And so we're going to catch up now. So you're the founder of Teaching Well. Could you give everyone a brief explanation of what Teaching Well is all about?
Yeah, so we look to provide teacher well-being services to school districts and individual teachers. So we really try to partner with districts and school leaders to bring teacher well-being programs to their schools so that they can really serve students better. So that's the biggest thing is instead of bringing services directly to students, we want to bring services to teachers so that they can do their best jobs.
That is awesome. And, there's so much going on here right now that has to do, and we're going to get to a bunch of that in just a minute, that people need some help and guidance in dealing with some of the things that make their lives a little stressful, or maybe thinking about deciding to go do something else other than work in the schools and so forth. So one of the things that you've done is you've written a book called The Path of the Mindful Teacher. So why'd you write this book, and who's it for?
So I wrote this book because, as you said, I went through 2 bouts of my own teacher burnout. And this book is the result of me putting the tools that I learned into a format all teachers can read and appreciate. And that's what I get a lot of feedback about, is that any teacher who reads it says, I know you were a teacher. Like, there's no doubt that you were a teacher. You went through the same things that, I go through all the time. And what I found in my search for kind of healing from my burnout is a lot of things were working outside the classroom, but there weren't a lot of tools for how to bring these sorts of practices into my actual teaching and into the way I interacted with students. So I created a book based on my experience of actually bringing mindfulness practices, well-being practices, self-care practices to school. So it wasn't something that I just did outside of school. It was something that I actually wanted to bring into where it actually mattered to me. That was, of course, I wanted to do my best outside of school, but where I was kind of flipping my lid, reacting, was inside school. So I wanted to explore that more.
Awesome. And one of the things and it's a great book. I've read it, and the details that you get into and so forth, which is awesome. As educators, we need those voices that help us figure out and kind of deal with what those daily things are that are going to take us different directions and might make us feel bad or sorry for ourselves or something like that. So I like that. We talked back in 2022 and now it's 2024. I mean, any thoughts about some of the biggest concerns for teachers and wellness now?
Well, I think that when we talked in 2022, we were going into that first year that was kind of feeling like post-COVID. And now I feel like COVID's still around, but we are still post-COVID. But things haven't really changed. And in fact, I think the alarms are getting louder that we need to do something. So I think a lot of administrators I had spoken with, and even a lot of teachers, just thought, are we going to go back to normal? Is it going to, but we're seeing that our students need so much more than we even realized. And that is putting such a bigger strain on the educators to deliver. And it's delivering on things that we were never asked to be trained on or even to do. So there isn't just a one size fits all solution, but I feel like we are finally starting to talk about the fact that there needs to be more support and more systematic support, not just like a couple teachers here and there getting some training on things. We need systematic support and training so that we can transform our schools, because they need to meet the students where they're at, and we need to meet the teachers' needs as well.
Awesome point. I mean, it's one of the things that not every child, but many of the children, been at home dealing with whatever the world is like at home when they're doing their schooling, and some of them discovered that they could turn their teachers off. Oh, check that out. Or push their buttons a little more than normal by, leaning back in the chair or twisting around or doing other things. And my point is that, however some of those teachers dealt with that, then many of them came into the building not ready to step right back into the role of being a student, following direction and guidance and proper student role models and things like this about how they're expected to do things in the classroom, and that very stressful. One of the things that I think that not only were teachers asking questions about is it ever going to be back to normal, I think administrators were thinking the same thing. Like, okay, we got them back, let's go, let's move it, and then you suddenly find out that there's a new nuance to the kids. I mean, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that's so true. I think we do need to adjust. And like, that doesn't mean that it's never going to get better, but it's probably going to be different, and to just adjust our expectations to allow for, not having to go back to what it was. Maybe like, let's open up our possibility to see like, how can schools perhaps support kids in a different way, or in the ways that they need right now. And how can we also do that for our educators?
I think that's important. In the introduction, Danielle, I mentioned a couple of terms. One of them was overwhelm, another stress, another burnout. Could we talk about what you mean by these terms? And let's share some thoughts about how not to deal with these challenges.
Well, I think one of the biggest things that I found in all of my work with myself and with the other educators that I work with is that a lot of our stress and burnout and our overwhelm, I'll kind of like lump those all together, because I think they sometimes all are the root of the same thing. And the root is we focus on so much that we can't control, and we don't focus on the things that we can. And I, of course, don't want any teacher to be putting up with like a toxic school system where they are unable to like get their basic needs met. But I think when we are overwhelmed, we are always looking externally. We're always, trying to figure out, and even as educators, like that's our caring profession. But sometimes we lose sight of the things that are right before us that we really can control. So if we can do that, that will start to hopefully allow us to create better boundaries. That will allow us to say no to things that we really can't do. That will allow us to focus on the things that we can do. And when we do those things collectively, like in a package, you start to get less and less burnout and less stress. Again, there's a certain level of stress that's just inherently with the job. But that overwhelm, that overstress, that hyper drive that turns into anxiety, when we start to bring these tools together again collectively, we start to lessen those things.
Gotcha. One of the things, because I think one of the things that becomes so apparent is that. Many times, especially, okay, let me just get to this. All right. So I hate to talk about generations, but I'm going to talk about them. So for example, a good chunk of my generation was told to suck it up and, move on. Just, do whatever. Go take a drink of your Diet Coke and we can figure this out. And since then there's some changes in thoughts about that and whether that's helpful or not. And I mean, what advice would you give to a teacher who's feeling these that feeling of overwhelm, or, maybe even thinking that they're at that point of going, maybe I just do better in the insurance agency, world or something like that. And not that there's anything wrong with that. That's not my point.
Yeah. And I would say the same thing. And one of the things in my book is that I do lay out, like, there are paths that you don't have to stay in this profession. So I certainly don't want to say that everybody should, but what I would say is, could you give it a solid chance? Give it a solid chance to, again, go through those practices where you write the things down of like, what can you control? What can't you control? And then do an honest appraisal of if this, if you do those things and you're still at the end of like the day, like this just isn't for me, then I get that. But, doing an honest appraisal and then really putting some things in motion and some tools in place can sometimes do a lot. And again, also finding a life outside of school can be so powerful. So many of us, when we get into that anxiety and stress mode and things aren't going well in school, we double down on school. I'm not saying to check out, but I'm saying, is your life fuller outside of school? Are there things that you are passionate about that you can bring some energy and life to? Because sometimes when we like kind of let go of the micromanaging and control of our classroom, we begin to see like, okay, there's more to me than just being a teacher. And then you bring that into your actual classroom and you're so much better for it. So, I mean, that's just one like thing that maybe people could try.
One of the things that I think it's bandied about a lot is, that's why I ask you about those terms, because sometimes people say, oh, I'm burned out. And maybe that's not really what they mean. But what do you think are some of the most common issues that create burnout that could be prevented?
I think that, I would just reiterate that idea of thinking we need to control everything and then getting into that, into that even idea with students, like thinking that we are the cause. Maybe we take things too personally. Like that was one of my major things, was that I took things personally, and then I would hold on to, if a student didn't do something that I really felt that they should do, I would begin to like over identify with their success or their failure. And again, I think that's so typical for teachers, because we want our kids to be passionate about the topics that we're passionate about. And we want them to learn the things that we know that, might even interest them or that will get them far. But I think that is sometimes that over identification, that that all or nothing thinking, when we start to say like, they always do this, they never do this, like trying to change that language can do a lot to helping our health and well-being. So I think that's just some of the things I would consider.
I like that. It's one of the things that you write about and talk about is kind of revolutionizing the individual's mindful awareness. And you say this: the secret to stepping up and creating change as a leader, it takes 3 steps to be able to make this this revolution in how they're looking at the world. One of them is trace your tendencies, another is learn about scripts, and another is create moments of calm. So let's talk about what you mean, where this is going, and then let's then shift to explaining what tracing your tendencies is all about.
Sure. So this is, again, an acronym, because educators love acronyms, and this is my TLC acronym. So it's tracing your tendencies, learning about your scripts, and creating opportunities for calm. And what I would say to any school leader who's listening, or any teacher who is listening, is thinking about doing this 3-step process for just like a day or two. So the idea is, when you trace your tendencies, you start to think about where you get reactive in your school day. So, and then you start to trace, like, when does it happen? What time of day, with certain students or colleagues or scenarios or situations? And you start to just write it down. It's best when you write it down. It makes it more meaningful. And you just trace what those things are. So for a day or a couple of days, trace those major reactive moments. And then you start to flip your script, or learn about your script, I should say. And for me, I'll say my tendency, I'll just give you an example from my classroom. My tendency would be, when a kid was late, I would always think they were being disrespectful to me. And again, so I was tracing my tendency. When did I get reactive? When did I get confrontational? It was when a student was late. And then when I was learning about my script, I started to pick apart that moment. I started to consider, okay, what's that script? Oh, it's disrespect. Is there something other than disrespect that could be going on here? So I was learning about the script, but I was also allowing for more space within that script to consider that maybe this kid had nothing to do with me, and he was meeting his girlfriend and he was late. Now, does that mean he shouldn't be getting a tardy pass? Of course not. He does, but he doesn't need my confrontation in addition to it. It allowed me to then give, some conversation to expectations and things like that, without getting into like a back and forth with the kid, or even like a reactive situation where the whole class was impacted by my snipey remarks. And then when I traced my tendencies, after I traced my tendencies, I learned about my scripts. Then I wanted to create opportunities for calm. Of course, a kid's going to be late again. So what can I do to calm myself down if and when this inevitable thing is going to happen again? So I set up a system. That was my calm. It was, I would give the kid a piece of paper. He would write down why he was late on the piece of paper. We wouldn't talk about it until later, if we talked about it at all. It allowed him to give me his 2 cents, me to take in the information in a way that wasn't like in front of the classroom. But that was my opportunity for calm. It gave me space without letting him not have the consequences of being late, but it didn't need to like jack up my emotions so much. So that's the TLC kind of framework that I like to teach for teachers and school leaders. Anybody can use this as they go through their day. And then you start to create real moments. Everybody tells us to breathe, right? They're like, oh, just take deep breaths throughout your day, whatever, which is good. I mean, yeah, we want to breathe. That's a good thing. But what I want to do is to actually do it at the right spots. Like, where are the places that it actually matters? So creating those opportunities for calm, when we actually figure out where we need them, that's where we build them.
I love this. Just that I was laughing, even though listeners can't see that. It brought a big smile on my face because I used to have a boss who would, I'd call him up and say, I need to explain to you what I'm dealing with right now. And when I'm calling him, it has to do with stuff that's more under his control than in my world as a high school principal. And he'd say, okay, all right, Steve, breathe. So, and before he talked to me, breathe. And I'm like, nice. So, it's so important that I think we have some process here. And your TLC is important as a way of going about addressing it, because you think about some of the things that we can immediately do, like what, some people might say, push your buttons. When somebody, for example, when you're working with kids, I don't know, once in a while they might roll their eyes at you. Does that cause you an issue? And your tendency is to go from 0 to 60 if that happens, and you're trying to remain calm. And I just think this really hits the nail on the head if the adult starts understanding a little bit more about how they react, and then can put some brakes on that and do something different. I had one of the things I always remember is teaching 10th grade world history, and in there I had a senior who she's taking it for her second or third time, not from me, from a couple other people, and so she's much older than the 10th graders that are in there, and not tooting my horn, but at the same time, I did have a colleague who would have handled it a lot differently when she suddenly said something out of the blue, because a lot of times she just kind of engaged in the class a little bit. As a senior with 10th graders, not so much fun for that person. But she just out of the blue said something just so off the wall that she'd raised her hand, and she says this thing, and I kind of looked at her, and my brain's going, how do I respond to that? And I looked at the window, because you have to know in that classroom there were these little dinky windows that were way up high. Mm-hmm. So but I pretended like I was looking out the window, and I went, and I looked back and I said, well, anyway, and I moved on, and she just kind of sat back and was good, and we got into the class, and the kids let me move on, but it was funny because later she came up to me after the class dismissed, and she apologized to me for saying what she said, and I'm very thankful that I didn't get upset. Because it could have easily, because it was like, what planet are you on? And all those things are going through my brain. But anyway, I think any number of us could describe different situations.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So what do you think in this world that we're in right now? How does the TLC help teachers and administrators deal with when they're feeling a little more stressful and than others, or thinking about, boy, it was a nice weekend this weekend. Maybe that fishing boat's looking good now, or something. I don't know. How kind of walk us through that. If they get themselves into the practice of doing this, how's it going to, help them identify what they're thinking about and then get on track and get back to doing what they should be doing?
Well, I think it allows you to actually bring moments of calm into your day, so that every week we're not just white knuckling it to the weekend. I think it's great to have great plans. I think it's great to enjoy our vacations and our breaks. But one of the things that I see so often, come April or May, is like people are just like on like thin ice with like just trying to get to summer, that like by the time they get to summer, they have to spend like a month just like scraping themselves off the floor to like do anything productive. And then it starts that cycle all over again. So I think that when you start to build in moments of calm in places where it really matters to you personally, you start to not have to like make it through. Like you have like those reprieves throughout your day. You have those routines, those rituals throughout your day that really start to bring self-care into a school and in a classroom. And when you do that, the culture of your school and classroom changes. And that changes the students without teaching them anything specific that you're doing, just by modeling it. When there are adult models of these things all over the place for kids, they get it.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So let's remind everybody about it. It's TLC, and it stands for
Tracing your tendencies, learning about your scripts, and creating opportunities for calm.
Love it, because you just never know in those situations. Because one of the things I love about working in schools is that there really is never a dull moment. So, and if you got some way of dealing with some of the ones that are a little more pushy and stressful, that can help you laugh it off, or at least redirect yourself or your attentions. I love that. Mm-hmm. Good stuff. All right. So before we go on, one of the things that I've heard you on is a podcast called Morning Motivation for Educators. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so Morning Motivation for Educators is a podcast, part of the B Podcast Network. And basically what I love about it is it's a 5-minute podcast that comes out most Monday through Friday, for educators, school leaders, anybody in the education field. And basically it brings together voices from all different education spectrums and gives, some sort of morning motivation for you to take into your day. So there's all different voices on Morning Motivation. And honestly, if any educator feels like they listen to it and they say, oh, that sounds cool, we always accept submissions from different school leaders and educators. So you can bring your own Morning Motivation to other podcast listeners. So it's a really great compilation.
Love it. I've listened to it a bunch, and I appreciate it. So it's a good show. So thank you so much for talking about it. If someone wanted to follow up and connect with you and learn more, where would you send them?
So come to my website, teachingwell.life. And also, if this topic resonated with anybody out there and you want to talk more about how to bring this to your school system, either as a teacher or a school leader, please follow up with a call. Teachingwell.life/call will take you directly to my scheduling page, and you can schedule a call with me and we can talk about what your school looks like and feels like, and how these programs, these offerings might work within, every school district is so different that's why I love to get on the phone with school leaders and teachers, because teachers have great ideas for how this could look in their school. So yeah, teachingwell.life/call to bring this to your actual school system.
Very cool. All right, Danielle. So I got one last question for you, and it goes like this: you're the closing keynote for a conference that's all administrators. You have principals and assistant superintendents and superintendents, and you get a chance to talk to them about TLC. What's that one thing you want them to remember as they're walking away and thinking about what you said?
I want them to remember that it all starts with them. So when they do this practice, when they start to trace their tendencies, learn about their scripts, create opportunities for calm, just by their doing that, or them doing that, they will impact the culture of their school. So I want them to know that it doesn't need to be something revolutionary right away. These small steps, these small shifts in our perception and what we do and how we show up with our students and our staff can absolutely start to shift the culture of our school. So start with you, but then if you want to do more, contact me.
Nice. I like that. Danielle, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts about teaching well, your book, The Path of the Mindful Teacher, and dealing with stress, overwhelm, and burnout, and sharing TLC with us. I think that's a powerful tool that, when you have something in your treasure chest to help you deal with whatever those pressures are, it makes the day a lot better and much easy to cope with and move on and look at the next day. So good stuff. What an awesome focus you have, and thanks so much. Wishing you the best in all you do.
Thank you so much for having me back. Hope to come back again.
Hey, you have been listening to Teaching, Learning, Leading K-12, a podcast to help you help kids achieve their dreams. Teaching, Learning, Leading K-12 is a member of the Education Podcast Network. Podcasts for educators, podcasts by educators. Teaching, Learning, Leading K-12 is a member of the podcast network based in Canada called Voice Ed Radio. Voice Ed Radio, your voice is right here. The opinions expressed on Teaching, Learning, Leading K-12 are those of the guests and host. Teaching, Learning, Leading K-12 is intended to share ideas, advice, and suggestions. Teaching, Learning, Leading K-12 is produced for educational purposes. Hey, thanks for listening. It would be awesome if you visited my website at stephenmiletto.com and connected with me, left a review, and listened to more episodes. And by the way, you could also share it with your friends, with your family, and your colleagues. Thanks so much. You're awesome.